Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here along with Michael Hepworth, and we are talking today about the relation between personal responsibility, liberty, and also agency. What was at stake in the War in Heaven? And so we love to talk about kind of recent things going on in society, current events, different topics, or show maybe some things from history or other things to help describe religious principles, spiritual principles, but also principles of truth that are kind of at battle or at issue in our society. We often debate over what's right or wrong, but sometimes I think in that debate we miss the understanding that we may be talking about two different things completely, because we ultimately have a choice in our existence. And we're taught from a scriptural perspective that we have the choice to choose liberty and eternal life, or to choose captivity and death. And when we hear that, sometimes we say there's a lot of other choices in life. But ultimately, the things we're choosing lead to one or the other. And we don't all desire liberty. We don't all desire freedom. We don't all desire the state. And so we start to make choices based on our desires. And we sometimes desire a state of captivity. And so today we're going to talk some about the principles and what liberty actually costs. Because liberty is not a state where everything is just perfect. There are bad things that can happen in a state of liberty. And this life that we came to, this earth, there are bad things that happen. Even if you take people out of the equation, there's wildfires, there's earthquakes, there's all these other things that go on where people can feel pain, they can feel heartache, they can feel suffering, they can feel loss, there's death, sickness, a lot of things happen. And at the end of the day, liberty in life entail that there's some level of suffering and pain. But those that believe in liberty and embrace it believe that the pain or the cost or the suffering is worth the reward. Other people, they'll say, I don't want to experience anything bad, and so give me something else. Give me a different state of existence. And so sometimes our battles aren't just about our battles over issues in society. They're not just about what's right or wrong necessarily, or what's true even. They're about sometimes what we want, and what do we want more. So today when we're talking about some of this, think about that in the sense of evaluate what you want and looking at it. And here's a basic question. If you can go research something and learn it for yourself and come to your own conclusion about it, would you rather do that, or would you rather just have some smart person tell you what the answer is? And that's a basic question, but it goes to this, it dives kind of this heart of this notion of, am I willing to do the work necessary to make a decision for myself? Am I willing to be responsible for that decision? And am I willing to seek out and evaluate and determine what's best for me? If not, and I want someone else to tell me, I want someone else to make it easy, then am I desiring something else besides even life itself? Because in life itself, it's up to us to make a decision. We have to be the ones that are responsible. And so any form of agency that exists, which is the ability to choose, the ability to make decisions, which exists from laws existing and creation itself creating things in opposition to each other. Agency then arises. I can choose life or death. I can choose good or bad. I can choose light or darkness. I can choose to sacrifice or to hold on to things. And every time I make one of those decisions, it's being informed by a desire I have underneath that's driving a lot of what I view as good for me. So for example, if I go to a party with people and there's a nice sugary cake sitting there, do I eat it or do I not? Now, regardless of what's true about cake, meaning is it good for me, is it bad for me, that's not going to be what informs my decision on whether I eat that cake or not. what's going to inform my decision is what desire I have that's operating in me more strongly. Do I desire something tasty that's pleasant to the taste for that moment? Or is my desire to be fit, healthy, active, stronger at that moment? And sometimes for people, they'll say, oh, I want to lose weight or I want to be healthy, so I'm going to say no. But it's because there's this stronger desire. And they know what the consequence of eating a very sugary cake is. But sometimes we don't care about the consequence. We eat it because we just want the taste of it or the pleasure of that in that moment. And so when we talk about the war in heaven, I think it's important to understand that agency is really this struggle within ourselves where there's competing desires. And at the root of agency, there's two very strong desires, one for life itself and one for death, which means ultimately, to me, life is lived when I take responsibility, I choose, I act, I exercise my agency. And when I do that, life requires that I'm also responsible for what I do. So if I hurt somebody, I have to make it right. If I didn't do something, then I have to suffer the consequence. When we want those consequences taken away and we just want kind of no matter what I do, just give me a nice life, it's a state of spiritual death where we're not the one exercising our agency anymore. We're letting someone else choose for us. And this comes up often. And there's different ways you can say that we need to take responsibility, different terms you can use. You might be able to talk about self-determinism, where we have to be the ones that determine our own destiny, our own fate. We have to take responsibility for our life, and no matter what life hands us, we need to do something with it. Or just being responsible, learning things, doing things. These are some of the ways to describe this principle that if we want agency, if we want liberty, if we want life itself, the true life, the spiritual type life that leads to fulfillment and happiness, we have to choose it. And we have to opt into it. We have to live it. We have to be responsible for it. And this is one of the fundamental battles in the war in heaven, because Satan and his followers wanted Satan to make it sure for them. They said, oh, well, agency means I can make a mistake. Agency means I can be responsible. I can suffer. They said, just take all that away and just make sure I get what I'm going for. Remove the ability for me to fail. And from Michael and I's perspective, when they sought for that, they chose spiritual death based on a desire they had. It wasn't because they were deceived. They wanted to not experience pain. They wanted to not experience loss, failure, these different things that go along with liberty. And they wanted to take away the ability for people to mess up, which means they were also taking away the ability for people to do the right thing. So in a realm of liberty and personal responsibility, keep in mind that whenever you ask for liberty or freedom, there's a cost to it. There's work involved. You don't just get it and it's just this thing that's there. It requires a deep sense of work from you, but work and creation and production, that's what brings fulfillment to life. That's what brings happiness to life. And I strongly believe the more we push work and productivity out of our lives and creation, and we just want things handed to us, the more depressed we're going to become because we're not living life the way it was intended to be. Michael, what are your thoughts, comments so far on liberty, personal responsibility, and how those go together?
I was reading a comment by Milton Friedman. He talked a little bit about this, and he said that freedom imposes costs as well as benefits. As if you have to make up your own mind, that's a terrible thing. Most people would prefer to have their minds made up for them. But if we're going to maintain a free society, we each of us have to undertake the task of making up our own mind. He discusses the task being, or the consequence and the cost of freedom being, the fact we have to decide for ourselves. And I think at a base level, most of us kind of think that we like that. But if we think a little bit deeper, there's so many times when we ask other people to decide something for us. Decisions are hard, and there's a fear of a consequence, a bad consequence in decisions. And so we would love for someone to just step in and say, go here, do this, do that, and your life's going to be great. And the consequence of freedom is that we have to do that work ourselves. We have to research, figure it out, make a decision, and then take responsibility for the consequences of that. And I think one of the reasons that is important, we can go back to the scriptures where it talks about there are things to act and things to be acted upon. The more we defer choices to other people for us, the more we become something that is acted upon. And the more we take on choices and decisions and the responsibility of that, the more we become a thing that is acting. And if you think about this life, and as you discussed, what brings fulfillment, happiness, and what I think our ultimate goal is it's a becoming goal. We're trying to become something. And things that are acted upon are very limited in their becoming scope, limited or just unable to, depending on the state of how they can act. It's the ones that are acting that can become, they can make the choices to learn and grow. And so freedom in that case is necessary for us to become, for us to learn, to grow, be better. And then the more we defer it to someone else, even if we think, if you think that a group of very smart people, or maybe a group of religious leaders or something, can somehow figure out every good decision for you in life, and if they could just tell you what that is, then you'd have a happy life. You have to consider the fact that you are now not making any choices yourself. You're not learning and growing. You're just let somebody guide you. And so even if they could somehow make every good decision for you, at that point you couldn't call yourself good. You didn't make any decisions yourself. Another quote that Milton Friedman had on the same subject, he said, if you are not free to sin, then neither are you free to be virtuous. Virtue is a meaningless concept unless an individual has a free will to choose between one act and another. So if you just defer your free will to someone else, then you can't then become a virtuous person. You can't become a good person. You can't grow because you've just given that freedom up to someone else. Deferring your decisions is losing the ability to make a poor decision or a good decision. It's deferring the responsibility of, did I choose right or did I choose wrong? Which means you defer the consequence of that as well. And so it's really important. Freedom is important from my perspective in that becoming. We want to become, we want to learn, and we want to grow. And without the taking on the responsibility of choosing and taking on the responsibility of whatever the consequences are, we accept those, and we lack the ability to become.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One thing I see as an attorney is more and more our laws seek to place blame on other people. And this is extensive. If you slip and fall on a driveway that's covered in ice, then the law says, well, sue the homeowner and say they were negligent in not clearing their ice. It was their job to make the walk safe for you. And we see this playing out in so many ways, where even car manufacturers get sued over, well, you designed this wrong. You were negligent. You didn't think of every way to keep me safe. And so I'm going to sue you for it and say, you now have to pay for the damages that came to me. And that could even be if we were driving reckless. If I was driving completely reckless and caused a crash, I could still sue saying, oh, there's a design defect. It's your fault. I was injured. And now some states will apportion fault. But the very notion that we're imposing in our society this stronger and stronger level of responsibility to say, you're responsible for what someone else chooses to do, and you're responsible to make it safer for them, take away the pain. So if someone's going to do something stupid, well, you have an obligation to make it less harmful to them if they're going to do something stupid. That type of notion, from a legal perspective, kills individual responsibility. And as it does that, it's killing this notion of fulfillment and satisfaction in life. I remember seeing, so they had some wildfires in Maui, and burned all kinds of homes. And there was just one home that, amidst all these homes that are burned, there's one home still standing, and it's not touched by the flames. And some people had posted it as, this must have been God's favorite person or whatever. But the news said, no, this wasn't a miracle. This was someone that took on the responsibility and actually put things around their house to make it fireproof, essentially. And they took on the initiative and the responsibility to do more than fire code required. And they said, hey, if there's ever an issue, we don't want our house to burn down. And they were proactive and took on the responsibility. And now as a result, they have a house and others don't. And I remember looking at that thinking, that's a great example of this ability to have fulfillment in life, to make decisions, to exercise our agency, and to not expect someone else to make everything perfect for us. Do we just move in and say, oh, well, don't need to worry about an earthquake or not. Oh, the government must have figured it out. The more responsibility we hand to the government, so if we say, hey, make our cars safe for us, oh, make our buildings safe for us. I just want to be able to take a toaster home and know that it's going to work great. I won't get electrocuted or anything, and it'll do just what it's intended to do. Every time we ask someone else to do something for us, it contributes to a state where we feel less and less fulfillment in life. I'm now no longer capable of feeling fulfillment if my toaster works fine, because it's just what it has to be. Whereas if I bought things, if I fixed things up, if I made them nice, there's this incredible, meaningful experience that comes in life because I did something, I contributed, I made it better, I improved it. And our laws can actually take that away from us. Our politics can as well. And something that happened recently, so we're in 2024. Donald Trump's running for re-election. He lost in 2020, and the governor of Utah, Governor Cox, had not previously supported Trump. And then there was an assassination attempt on Trump. The bullet hit his ear. And after this, Governor Cox in Utah does a 180 on his feelings towards Trump. And he writes this letter to him, essentially kind of imploring him to do the right thing now, shape up a little bit in the governor's eyes. But he also says he's not going to support him. And so it made the news because of these different things. Now, from a political perspective, I say anyone can support whoever they want. I'm not going to have serious beefs if someone endorses someone or does something. But in this letter, I was deeply concerned when Governor Cox made a statement there where he said, only Trump could save this country. And I'm going to read this quote to you. And to me, this is an example of one of the things that's happening politically and in our law that is completely opposite to this principle of freedom and self-responsibility that we should have, personal responsibility. So Governor Cox stated, in part, he said to Trump, he said, you have the opportunity to do something that no other person on earth can do right now. Unify and save our country. So Cox just stated, no one else can unify and save our country. And then Cox continues, he says, I humbly submit that you, and he doubles down, and he says, and I sincerely mean this, only you can make that happen. Cox goes on to say, you can make your success in leading our country to a new era of peace, unity, and prosperity the greatest way to silence your critics. I believe in our better angels, Mr. President, and I believe you are capable of being that kind of leader for this troubled nation. It is a huge burden to be placed on any person. When I read this, I instantly asked, why is Trump the only person that can unify and save our country? Our country is composed of hundreds of millions of people who make decisions on a daily basis. No matter what any one president or governor or person says, we still have to choose how we respond to it. And I'm not discounting the fact that people can have significant influence and help persuade or sway people. But at the end of the day, even if a leader says something incredibly persuasive and it's wrong, I'm still responsible for whether I go along with it or not. I can't shift that responsibility to them if I want to maintain a state of liberty. And in our country, with the way it's set up, no one person can make or break the country. It requires the agency of hundreds of millions of people choosing how they respond to that one person. And to me, it's deeply troubling when we say, oh, you're the one that can save us. And what we're doing in that moment is we're giving some level of personal responsibility. We're saying, I'm powerless to do anything. Well, am I? I can vote. I can treat people right or wrong. I make a lot of decisions about people I interact with. And is it true that only one person can heal a divide? Because how does one person heal a divide that's contributed to by hundreds of millions of people? Each person has to make that decision. And to me, we should be aggressively pushing in our politics and our law solutions that empower people in making and exercising agency and making decisions. When we push the notion that only one person can save us, to me, it harkens back to this time in the Book of Mormon. There's a group called the Nephites, and they reached a point where they had a state of liberty, pretty strong state of liberty, but people wanted a king. The spirit of the kingmen arose among them, and this group of Nephites wanted to have a king instead of their state of liberty. And they were willing to go to war for it and fight for it. And it talked about the problems that came as a result. But I've always wondered, why would people want a king? If you experienced liberty, why would you want a king? Well, the short answer is that a king can, with a sweep of his hand, just decree something. And so if you have an enemy or you have someone you don't like, they can silence them. They can put them out. You don't have to deal with them anymore. And so if the king is someone that's going to do something you feel strongly about, it's the easiest way to get there. It doesn't require this personal responsibility, this working, this sacrifice, this pain of going through these different things to reach a certain state. You just have someone that just does it, like magic. And the spirit of the kingmen, when we say only one person can save us, to me, that's a spirit where we're transferring this and we're saying, I don't believe in liberty anymore. Give me the person that, the human that saves and makes all this right, takes away the pain, takes away the divide. And I think we need to be very aware of that in how we perceive the law, the role of the law, the role of politics and politicians. Are we asking them to remove all harm? I look at it with crib recalls. Cribs are always being recalled. And this is something where I ask, what's our goal with this? Is it to remove all harm, or is there something else going on here? But again, there's many things we can look at with that.
And the other aspect of that is the taking away of personal responsibility. So if you say, we want a king to make everything right, to your point, hey, king can just make a decree, and now all those laws that I wanted passed that are going to save, make people safe and going to save the environment, that's all going to get passed because the king is obviously going to be somebody who I agree with. That's the way we think about it. But the flip side of it is, if anything ever goes wrong, it's not your fault. You're free at that point. It's the king's fault. Today we still try to do that with our government as it exists. Something bad happens, it's the government's fault. The economy isn't what we'd like it to be, it's the government's fault. We're not making the money we wish we could make, it's the government's fault. We want to push personal responsibility off onto somebody else, because if we didn't, that would be saying, what choices have I made to bring about whatever it is that I'm experiencing, whatever problem that's here. I don't want to acknowledge any poor choices that I've made. Therefore, can I find a way to push that off? If we elect a king, I can just blame the king. The king makes all the rules. Therefore, I don't have any personal responsibility. And it's all the king's fault. And I think when you look at something like what Governor Cox was saying, that's one of the outcomes of this is, well, if it doesn't work out, let's say that Trump doesn't get elected like he wants him to, then any problem that happens after that is just the other guy's fault because Trump was going to save it. And if we got to a point where only Trump could actually save it, then the question to Governor Cox and others is, well, what have you been doing for the last 20 years? How did we get to this point? Are you just abdicating all your responsibility for that time where you should have been working to prevent from getting to a certain place? It's looking to yourself and saying, what decisions have I made that have contributed to whatever it is that we're experiencing? Have I done my part, or am I just saying, please give me a king, that way I don't have personal responsibility anymore? They'll make everything safe, and if they don't, it's not my fault, and then you can feel justified at that point.
Yeah, and it's great to point that out, that we can then say it's not our fault. And I feel I see that a lot where people say, oh, that's the liberals' fault, that's the conservatives' fault. We blame these other groups for things. Or we even say it's the president's fault, to your point about the economy. And here's a secret to America. The president actually doesn't fully determine what happens with the economy. One of the big things that goes on with the economy is our spending habits, how much we're borrowing as a people. Right now in America, credit card debt hit a record high. We are borrowing money like crazy. And what does that do for an economy? It actually lifts it up. Debt will lift up economy for a time, but it's a bubble. And at some point, the debt comes due and we run out of cash for it. And any economy that stretches too far on debt will have a recession. Doesn't matter the president in charge. It will happen. America tried to delay the recession with COVID because we suddenly had a lot of debt not coming due with people not working and things. Airlines are heavily laden with debt when they didn't have people flying. All their debt's coming due. So what does America do? It ships money to everyone. Says, here's some money, here's some money, here's some money. Well, what does that do? It kickstarts inflation. But again, these are pieces that we have to recognize our own role in. And what are we doing as people? Are we living within our means? Are we living appropriately, or are we maxing out our credit cards? And do we have savings to be able to go without a job if we lose our job? There's people losing their jobs right now. Tech's going through a kind of a reset with things. And we look at these pieces and we have to understand that our choices have an impact. And yeah, I don't fully control the economy, but guess what? The president doesn't either. The laws in America are still such that I have some level of responsibility attached to it. And the president has some level of responsibility, but not all. And yes, politics can influence an economy, but even with some really bad economic policies, economies have still done well. Even with good economic policies, they've done poorly. And the two don't always marry or match up super well, because the economy is the private interaction of hundreds of millions of people choosing what to do in exchange for other things. It's the conscious decision of hundreds of millions of people choosing to say, I want to spend my time on this, or use my money for this, or I find this of value. But that's what an economy is this driving of exchange and personal choice, and it's a private choice. And so, but when we consign ourselves to say, oh, my life's just at the mercy of someone else, I can't do anything about the economy, we become depressed. A life where we have no control is depressing. We become far more desperate for our king to win, because we view it as the only way to be saved. And when we view it as the only way to be saved, then politics becomes much more desperate, much more violent, much more toxic, because people feel more and more it's a make it or break it situation. And we hear that rhetoric so much right now in politics of, oh, this election's going to determine everything, it's going to make it or break it. Why? If we as a people choose that this election doesn't make or break America, why does it have to? That's a decision we get to make. Sure, we could choose to throw our hands up in the air after this election and just give up, or we can say, no, America survived 4 years of a lot of presidents, and it'll survive 4 more years if I make sure it does. And we can still do things. If one president gets in, well, vote for the opposite party in Congress if you want. That's a great way to create some gridlock so that nothing happens for 4 years. There's all kinds of options. But the main point is that in our politics, we're being pushed to say it's someone else's responsibility. In our social things, we're being pushed to say it's someone else's responsibility. Why did I fail my test? Well, my teacher didn't give me enough help, or I had some really tough mental issues, or, if we come up with these excuses, we're blaming it on something else or someone else. And that removes liberty and it removes life from us. The very essence of life is to recognize, what could I do different? How could I do it differently? And then to embrace that and say, I failed the test. That means I need to study harder. It means I need to put more time into it. And yeah, maybe we struggle with mental health. Maybe we struggle with things people did to us. Maybe we were in an accident. All those things happen. We don't choose everything that comes into our life. But this is where it raises the question of, but are we here to act or just to be acted upon? And the more we're just acted upon, we're like, oh, yep, car accident wiped me out. I can't do anything. The more we lose our internal state of liberty. And again, there's pain to it. It may hurt to still go to work after a car accident. It may hurt to still provide for a family. It may hurt to push through mental or emotional pain to get things done. But when we choose to make decisions and experience life, all that it brings, and accept responsibility, say, no matter what life throws at me, I'm still responsible to do my best and do my part, we live to the highest state of fulfillment possible. To recognize that we then get satisfaction, we get fulfillment from life, we get happiness from life as we work, as we sacrifice. Those are the key elements to bring that. And I'm just deeply concerned in our law when we embrace so many notions of transferring responsibility to someone else. Oh, it's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. I'll sue you. I'll sue you. I'll sue you. It's a victim type mentality where everyone else has done me wrong, but we're not fully recognizing what we could have done differently. And when the law embraces that, to me, it leads to a state of more and more dependence, more and more passing of blame, and less accepting personal responsibility. And that becomes enticing at some point where people say, yeah, I want universal income. I don't want to have to be the one that makes sure I make enough. But universal income, I can guarantee you, will bring you no happiness, maybe for the first little bit. But you'll feel so unfulfilled not working for your money and just having it there. Things given to you. It destroys the soul, it robs it of life. But it's a desire some people have because it's easier. I don't make responsibilities. It's not my fault. You can't blame me. And so it's easier in some ways to live that way. And it's a choice that Satan's followers made when they didn't want agency, they didn't want risk, they didn't want the harm that could come. And it's a choice that we are faced with on a recurring basis today of, do I want liberty? If I do I take on the full responsibility of that? Do I look at my life and do I evaluate what I need to change to be different and to experience different and to have different outcomes? Or do I just blame others? Do I seek for a king? These are all signs that we're moving away from liberty. If we believe only one person can save us, or if we believe we're not responsible, we're moving away from the state of liberty. Michael, do you have any other thoughts or comments for us?
Yeah, on when you discussed, pain, I think that's an important thing to consider because you say, what do you want? Do you want freedom? Do you want captivity? And at a simple level, when we make a choice, we will willingly undergo pain to get certain things, depending on what we're choosing. If we decide that we want to learn how to run a marathon, then and that's our actual desire, we really desire it, then we're going to go through some considerable pain to train to do that. We'll be running, perhaps getting up early, staying up late, doing a lot, testing our bodies. It's not going to be comfortable. We're willing to do that because we desire the outcome. It's the same with, it's easy to understand in a physical sense. I mean, you could say the same thing for learning a new concept, a mathematical concept. I really want to understand something really difficult. I need to learn some harder calculus concepts. I'm going to have to put in the pain, the mental anguish of studying and learning to get to the point where I can understand it. If we say we want to be free, we have to understand the cost and be willing to accept the cost and understand that it is something that's good and something worth fighting for, but it is something we have to fight for. And sometimes it takes, to your point of, we want to blame other people. Sometimes it comes down to where we feel like maybe we didn't do something wrong. Maybe there was just an accident. And even then, we have to accept consequences of life being life. Or we have to ask ourselves at a deeper level if we're really doing all we can. I was thinking of when you were talking about that, my children, one of their favorite excuses is, well, I didn't mean to. They do something wrong, they break something, they hurt a sibling. They'll say, well, I didn't mean to. And that's justification, right? I didn't intend to hurt them. I'm not a bad person. Yeah, agree. You didn't intend to hurt them. You're not a bad person. But one thing I have to tell them is they have to understand how to take even more responsibility for their actions. They're not allowed to just flail about carelessly and break things or hurt their siblings. They have to take responsibility for what decision they make with their body, even if they don't intend to hurt somebody else. Maybe we didn't intend to fall down on somebody's sidewalk, but there's always a higher level of responsibility we can take for our own actions and not ask that responsibility to be shifted to somebody else. If our desire is to be free, then we have to understand the choices we have to make and the pain, for lack of a better term, that we'll have to go through, the cost we have to pay in order to be free.
Yeah, and that, again, the cost to me is worth it. It's kind of like we choose things of value to trade all the time. Apple wants over $1,000 for an iPhone, and many people say, "Yeah, the cost is worth it. I'll pay it." But liberty has a cost to it. We have to pay it, and that's in personal responsibility. That's in looking at our lives and evaluating, what can I do? What do I need to do? And if we're shirking that, we are walking away from liberty itself. We're saying, I don't want it. And so liberty, people that love liberty have to embrace personal responsibility. It's the only way that these things work. They go hand in hand, because it is up to us to be responsible for our lives, to prepare, to plan, to do different things, and to potentially suffer consequences when we don't. And if we want the law to remove all those, or we want one candidate to save us, we're talking in terms of saying agency's lost, liberty's lost. And my personal belief is agency will never die so long as someone wants it. It's always there. It's built into the laws of nature. And we can always choose as a people to be better. And even if no one else is being better around us, we can still choose to do what's right. Take a stand and stand for what's right. We never have to just go along. We never have to give in. And so I would encourage you, as you look at your life, to think about, are there places where I've just passed the buck on to someone else? Say, sure, you tell me what to do. Are there, experts or others you listen to where you say, I just trust their opinion? This is something common I get where people say, Austin, what should I do? What do we do about this political situation? I say, well, what are your opinions? I don't know. You just tell me and I'll do it. I say, no, that's not how this is supposed to work. We each need to think, to evaluate, to come to our own conclusions and opinions, and maybe they match with someone else. But if we don't undertake the work and effort, we're just going along for the ride. We're looking to one person to save us. And that's not the way that liberty works. And so we appreciate you joining us today and talking about some of these things. We will circle back next week to talk about more principles from the War in Heaven. some of the ways they play into our politics and social issues of the day. And we hope you have a great week and can join us then. Thanks so much.